On October 4, 2021, at 11:51 in the morning Eastern Time, someone at Facebook issued a routine maintenance command to update the configuration of Facebook's backbone network. The command contained an error. In approximately 6 minutes, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, the three largest social communication platforms on Earth, were entirely unreachable. 3 billion users lost access simultaneously. Facebook's own engineers, attempting to remotely diagnose and fix the problem, discovered that their internal tools for accessing Facebook's systems were also offline. The authentication systems that allowed engineers to log in remotely ran on the same network infrastructure that had just been disconnected from the internet. To restore the network, engineers had to physically travel to Facebook's data centers and manually reset the routers that controlled everything else. The outage lasted approximately 9 hours and 37 minutes. It was the longest and most complete outage in Facebook's history. This is the Facebook Outage 2021 What Happened story. But the 9 hours of downtime are not really what this video is about. What the outage revealed, and what regulators, infrastructure researchers, and dependency theorists had been documenting for years before it happened, is a structural question about what it means for a single private company to become load-bearing infrastructure for the global communication system. To understand the outage, you need to understand one thing about how the internet works. There is no central router. The internet is a network of networks, approximately 90,000 individual autonomous systems, each owned by a company, university, or government, each responsible for announcing its own IP addresses to the global routing table. The protocol that manages this is called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. BGP allows autonomous systems to tell the rest of the internet where they are and how to reach them. When you type a web address, your request travels through a chain of BGP routing decisions until it reaches the server that hosts what you are looking for. Facebook operates its own autonomous system, AS32934, which includes all of its data centers, the IP addresses of its servers, and the backbone network connecting them. When you open Facebook on your phone, your request first finds Facebook's network via BGP, then is routed internally to the specific server that handles your account. On October 4th, a configuration update to Facebook's backbone routers included a command that withdrew all of Facebook's BGP route announcements from the global routing table. The internet no longer knew where Facebook was. Every request for Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp was met with nothing because the network had announced that Facebook's IP addresses did not exist. The second layer of the problem was DNS, the domain name system. DNS is the internet's address book. It translates human-readable domain names like Facebook.com into the numerical IP addresses that routers understand. Facebook's DNS servers are themselves hosted on Facebook's network. When Facebook's BGP routes were withdrawn, the DNS servers became unreachable. Attempts to look up Facebook.com now failed even before a routing decision could be made. The combination was complete. No BGP route to Facebook's network. No DNS response to translate Facebook's domain names. From the perspective of any device anywhere on the internet, Facebook had simply ceased to exist. Facebook began as a university social network in 2004 and reached 1 billion monthly active users by 2012. Its acquisitions of Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014, for approximately $1 billion and $19 billion respectively, were among the largest technology acquisitions in history at the time. The strategic rationale was clear. Instagram was the fastest-growing social photo platform. WhatsApp was the dominant messaging platform in most of the world outside the United States, particularly in India, Brazil, and across Europe and Africa. Acquiring both consolidated Facebook's position as the essential private communication layer across multiple different use cases and demographics. But the acquisitions also had an infrastructure consequence. Instagram and WhatsApp were integrated into Facebook's technical backbone. They shared data centers, authentication infrastructure, and, critically, network routing architecture. What had begun as 3 independent services became, technically, a single system with multiple front ends. By 2021, Facebook's infrastructure supported approximately 3.5 billion monthly active users across its family of applications. Its engineering blog documented a network of data centers on multiple continents, connected by a privately owned fiber backbone that the company had invested billions of dollars building. This backbone, separate from the public internet, was designed to move data between Facebook's facilities quickly and reliably. It was also designed, for efficiency reasons, with its own internal routing layer that relied on BGP configuration files stored on the backbone routers themselves. The configuration update that caused the outage was intended to be a routine modification. The procedure for making such modifications, documented in Facebook's post-mortem, had a specific set of safety checks. On October 4th, a bug in the audit tool used to verify configuration changes failed to flag the error before the command was executed. The fragility that made the outage so complete, and so difficult to remediate, was a circular dependency that Facebook's infrastructure engineers had documented internally, but had not fully resolved. Facebook's internal communication and remote access tools, including the systems engineers used to log in remotely and the tools used to diagnose network problems, relied on the same backbone network that was affected by the outage. When the BGP routes were withdrawn, these internal tools became unreachable at the same moment as the consumer-facing applications. Engineers attempting to diagnose the problem from outside Facebook's offices found themselves unable to access the diagnostic systems. Facebook's post-mortem acknowledged this. Many of the internal tools and systems we use to investigate and resolve outages of this kind were dependent on these same network systems that were affected. The engineers who needed to fix the problem could not get in through the front door or the back door. The remediation process required Facebook engineers to physically travel to their data centers with identification, physical access credentials, and equipment to manually reset the routers that had distributed the incorrect configuration. This process was slowed by the physical security systems designed to protect the data centers, which also required verification through systems that were partially affected by the outage. The remediation took approximately 5 hours from the moment engineers arrived on site to the moment BGP routes began to reappear on the global routing table. Recovery was not instantaneous. The sudden reappearance of billions of DNS requests from devices worldwide that had been unable to reach Facebook created a traffic surge that required careful management to avoid a second failure as services came back online. At 11:51 in the morning, the configuration command executed. Within approximately 6 minutes, BGP monitoring systems operated by independent infrastructure companies, Cloudflare, Ripe NCC, Kentic, detected that Facebook's autonomous system had withdrawn its route announcements. The BGP routing table, which is publicly observable, confirmed it. AS32934 had gone silent. At approximately 12:15 p.m., Facebook's internal automated monitoring systems, those that could still reach the internet, began generating alerts. By this point, the engineering teams responsible for backbone infrastructure were aware of the problem, but unable to access the systems needed to diagnose it remotely. At 1:30 p.m., with remote remediation not possible, Facebook deployed field engineers to its data center facilities. Physical access to the data centers required clearing security verification in facilities where some authentication systems were impaired by the outage. The process took longer than it would have under normal conditions. At 5:58 p.m. Eastern Time, the first BGP route announcements from Facebook's network began reappearing in the global routing table. DNS resolution for Facebook's domains resumed. The traffic surge that had been building for 6 hours, hundreds of millions of devices attempting to reconnect, began resolving. At 6:02 p.m., Facebook.com began loading for some users. Full service restoration took until approximately 9:28 p.m., nearly 10 hours after the initial failure. During the outage, Zuckerberg personally lost approximately $7 billion in net worth, as Meta's share price fell approximately 5%. The company lost an estimated $60 to $100 million in advertising revenue. The approximately 3.5 billion users of Facebook's applications lost access to tools through which, for many of them, they conducted significant portions of their personal and professional communication. The outage generated significant regulatory attention, though primarily as confirmation of arguments that had already been advanced rather than as a catalyst for new legislation. EU Digital Services Act negotiations, already underway, included references to the outage as evidence of systemic risk from large platform concentration. U.S. senators cited the outage in questioning about antitrust and infrastructure regulation. Facebook published its post-mortem on October 5th, one of the most detailed and technically honest accounts of a major outage published by a large technology company. The post-mortem acknowledged the configuration error, the circular dependency that prevented remote remediation, and the need for better out-of-band access systems. It did not address the structural question of what it meant for a single company's infrastructure failure to disrupt global communication at this scale. The question of whether Facebook's infrastructure constitutes critical infrastructure, and whether its design and redundancy should therefore be subject to regulatory requirements similar to those applied to telecommunications carriers, power utilities, or financial market infrastructure, has not been resolved in any jurisdiction as of the public record. The standard version of the Facebook outage story is a technical story about BGP, about configuration errors, about circular dependencies in infrastructure design. That version is correct. The deeper version is about a question that the outage made visible in a way that no regulatory report had previously managed. What is the appropriate governance structure for infrastructure that 3 billion people depend on, which is owned and operated by a single private company, whose failure is not subject to the regulatory frameworks that govern other forms of critical infrastructure? Telecommunications carriers in most countries operate under universal service obligations, emergency access requirements, and redundancy standards imposed by regulators. Power utilities are subject to reliability standards and are required to maintain out-of-band communications with regulatory bodies even during failures. Financial market infrastructure, exchanges, clearinghouses, payment systems, is subject to resilience requirements and regular stress testing by central banks and securities regulators. Facebook's infrastructure, at 3.5 billion users, exceeds the scale of any single regulated utility on Earth. Its failure affected more people simultaneously than any power outage or telecommunications failure in recorded history, and it was remediated by a private company's engineers driving to data centers with physical access cards, without regulatory oversight, without mandatory reporting timelines, and without any external authority involved in the restoration process. Facebook published a voluntary post-mortem. Meta has invested in redundancy improvements. Whether voluntary self-governance is the appropriate framework for infrastructure at this scale is the question the outage put into the public record without fully answering it. If you have a view on where the line should be between private infrastructure and regulated utility, the comments are open. Facebook's post-mortem from October 5, 2021 is publicly available on engineering.fb.com. The Cloudflare analysis from the same day is at blogflurv.com. Both are genuinely worth reading. They are among the most technically accessible accounts of large-scale infrastructure failure available to the public.